Hello everyone and welcome back to Indie Insight. In this week's episode I was extremely lucky to be joined by the amazing Benedict Nichols, who's the composer of titles such as Before We Leave, Omno and The Falconeer. Talked about everything from music composition, his early days in that sphere, and how it's come on so far to this day. If you'd like to support us online in any sort of way, you can do so by following any of the links in our description down below. And of course, please go and check out Benedict's work. He's an absolutely phenomenal composer and he was a pleasure to talk to this week. So I'll get out of your faces and we can get straight into the interview. Thank you so much. So thanks very much for joining me on the show today anyways, first and foremost. I want to kind of start off near the beginning, I suppose, of your musical career, I would say, because I know that you obviously, so you had Bachelor's of Music at Manchester University, went on then to do composition for screen at Bournemouth University and a master's. I always have an interest, particularly to hear from games composers, because as I'm sure you'll know, in the games industry, it's not that you're in one position doing one thing all the time. You have to be very easily able to adapt. So I know, particularly on some of your beginning titles of composition work, such as March of the Living, and even up until now with Omno, you didn't just do music composition, you also did stuff like trailer production, which involves a lot of design and editing. Did you start off as a composer when you first went into games, or was it more leaning towards that other element?
No, thanks for having me, by the way. I started composition. So I'll go back a little bit. So I got into composition at about 17, 18 because one of my brothers got a cool piano where you could do. It was old school, and you had to literally put the notes in dot by dot, and that got me interested. I went to Manchester University, and I was originally going to major in performance, but I injured my wrist, and so that kind of sent me more down the compositional route, which I already loved. I mean, I grew up playing games like Settlers and stuff, and loved the music, and was always wanted to make music like that. So it just gave me that extra nudge, Bournemouth University, where I did masters for music for film, and then I spent a couple of years kind of trying to start a production company where I was involved in editing and stuff with a good friend of mine, and I did some composition for friends who were animators and doing similar courses at Bournemouth University and stuff like that. And then one of my brothers was a game coder for a company in America, and they needed some help with their audio. So I kind of got involved and did that. And the trailer production side of things only really happened because I'm really fussy. And so I was working with these developers, and when you're working with small teams, you become friends, and you care about every aspect of the production. And so I wanted to make sure that things, not just my work, but everything about the game was presented as best as it could be. So I was like, well, I can help out with the editing here because I have got some experience, working with an old friend. And so it's sort of just I started doing it. And it's when you're writing the music and doing the editing, you can really make sure things sync and are as tight, and you kind of have a creative freedom, which is quite nice. Particularly when you're working with smaller teams, it does help. And I think it's nice for indie developers. If there's one guy, there's one guy, say, who's making the game, he's doing the visuals, who's also in charge of his marketing, who's also in charge of all of his social stuff and dealing, say, with a publisher or, Xbox, whoever they might be fortunate to be dealing with, to know that there's someone who's supporting them and helping them with doing trailer editing as well. Just it's nice to be able to offer that service, basically, and make sure everything is as perfect as you can possibly make it by your own standard, I suppose.
You mentioned that you're very fussy when it comes to bits like that. How fussy do you think you can really be with games composition? Because I kind of want to draw on, because I know you did a lot of film stuff, particularly there was one indie film, Far Away, you did, which I remember you telling, I think it was a publication back in 2015, that they had sent you the film and you did just the music all through it afterwards. And that's obviously allows you to have a bit greater in-depth detail from, point A to point B. But with games, say, like March of the Living, which is a permadeath style roguelike, which can have so many different paths, at what point do you go, okay, I need to stop being really fussy about this one particular part?
I don't think I ever stopped being really fussy about it. I'll be perfectly honest. For me, the measure is when I'm playing the game, testing the game, and I stop focusing on the music. Then I know that the music is really serving the game as it should. you know, and or at least as far as I think it should, and as far as the developer should, obviously. So it's kind of, that's the point for me. If I'm playing a game, which I've played hours and hours of, because I know my own music, and I stop focusing on, oh, what was that little symbol there? Did I like that rhythm there? Or, you know, what was that thing there? Or that instrument is 2 decibels too loud, or whatever. You know, if I stop doing that, then I know, okay, this music is good enough for now. But I will, I inevitably will come back and check things over and over and over again, and cross-checking, you know, mixes from one track to the next. And, you know, that's kind of one of the hats you have to wear when you're working with small teams, and you're not going to an external mixer, and, you know, you've got to do all of that yourself. So I have a kind of internal little saying, which is, you know, aim for perfection and you'll get really good. You'll never actually reach perfection, but if you aim up there, you'll get there. Whereas if you just kind of aim here as that will do, I've got to move on, the chances are it's not going to be satisfactory in the same way. So yeah.
Speaking a little bit on March of the Living, I know you described the soundtrack as, you know, adaptive, and it reacts to multiple parameters in the game. I think at least my audience will be a little bit aware of sort of the more what would be the word, kind of familiarization that's been brought around with adaptive scores recently, sort of through likes of Doom Eternal with Mick Gordon, is a very popular one for a lot of people. Can you maybe explain a little bit about what kind of, how the score adapts in March of the Living? What are the parameters you're looking at it affecting the score?
It's quite a while ago. So basically, I used the Elias engine. It was kind of early days for the Elias engine, which is a great tool for composers to kind of wet their feet in it, and it gets used in big projects as well. I mean, it was just used in Rage 2, I believe. And so basically, it's because it's kind of a roguelike. You go through these different areas. I basically kind of created atmospheres and kind of musical ideas for all the different kind of settings that there are, all the different backdrops and all the different sorry, I was a fly, all those kinds of things, so that the areas felt different, but at the same time there was the continuity. And then looked at tension, looked at health. I think if I remember correctly, it responds to health levels. If I remember correctly, I mean, honestly, it was 7 years ago now, and I've watched on quite a few things since. But yeah, it was like that. The Elias engine was great because you can the way you can have variations come in and out and stuff. It stops it getting boring, which you kind of need in those kind of atmospheric kind of, you know, it's the end of the world type roguelikes kind of thing. So yeah.
What would be one of the sort of the main differences you find, say, composing for something like March of the Living, which is roguelike and very adaptive, as opposed to, say, something that's maybe a little bit more linear like Omno?
What are the differences? Well, it's easier to start with similarities, I think, if that's okay. So the first thing is, obviously it's got to serve the game. With Omno, it's a linear experience, but at the same time, because you could explore these wide areas, I knew that the player could go from one area into the next bit at any point in the music. So you've got to had to make sure that whatever I was writing, it would feel natural enough to go into the next area. And it was the same thing in March of the Living. It was, you know, going from this into that bit, having, you know, that sense of continuity, and whether that means you predetermine what keys you're going to be in. You think ahead about kind of your fade ins and your fade outs and make sure that things are going to work nice and smoothly. It takes a lot of planning either way, to be perfectly honest. You know, it's not like Omno, I was able to just write a track and go, bosh, that's done, and I'll just send that off and that will go in and it will fit perfectly. I had to think about what's coming before it and what's going to be coming after it. And you know, Omno has, I can't remember, it's like 35, 36 bits of music in it in total. And so if you're thinking about one and you're thinking about the start, what's before and what's after, well, then everything, you have to think about everything at once. You've got to plan it all out at the same time. And I think it's the same for most game composers on any project that, you know, they're working on. You want to think about the overall continuity. And so that's a similarity. I suppose the difference is, March of the Living was a very different experience. It was more about atmosphere in the sense of, I didn't worry about, I think if I remember correctly, it doesn't always have a regular pulse. You know, it doesn't have that nice, because it's tensiony and unsettling. I wasn't worried about using the music systems inbuilt kind of bar lines and structural stuff like that. I used it more as kind of like each area's canvas with different layers that could just come in and out as they wish. Obviously, created with sensitivity, not just randomly chucked in and gone, "Oh, that works. Okay, phew, what a relief." Whereas Omno, obviously, I was writing nice melodies and kind of nice textural ideas, and so there's a sense of the pulse in the music for the vast majority of it. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question exactly, but there you go.
Yeah, I did want to kind of ask, because a lot of, especially beginner composers, a lot of the time when they're trying to put forward their best work to, say, a studio or to just even a solo developer, they'll very much put forward their more bombastic and epic pieces. How important do you think is it to kind of have a balance of both that and then, as you mentioned, more atmospheric tracks in your sort of portfolio?
Absolutely, it's hugely important. You've got to show that you've got the variety, particularly if you're starting out on a game project, and unless it's a game like, you know, Doom Eternal, or a game which has got a very clear, obvious style of music that it's going to be in, you need to be able to show that you've got some breadth to your ability, because you don't know how the game developer is necessarily going to evolve. You know, you can be working on the game and all of a sudden they go, "Hey, we're going to stick this nightmare section in. You know, we've had this great idea. We want horror music." And it's like, "Oh, right. Okay. Well, I need to be able to do that." So when you're pitching, yeah, it's important that you show off your best stuff first, the stuff that you're most proud of, because when you're writing on a game, you want to be proud of what you're doing, and, you know, your enjoyment in what you're writing comes through in what you write. So what you're proud of is important. You need to show off a bit of diversity as well. That's stylistically appropriate to the game, obviously. I mean, I wouldn't send off like a bit of chiptune music, you know, for something that everything else that is in an orchestral vein. It's just, they're not going to be interested in that. I'm wasting their time and, quite frankly, looking less professional myself. But yeah, I mean, I fell for that track when I first started out. Here's a big bombastic orchestral thing I've done, and I think there's still some of that old stuff on my website which I haven't updated in ages. But yeah, you've got to write music that A, shows off your ability, but B, shows off your sensitivity to the needs of games and game design. So taking time to study how game music really works before you pitch is really important. And actually, what's really good to do, if you can do, is get a bit of video footage of the game, or, you know, something similar, and actually write to it, and deliberately write it as if you were working on the game already, and then put it to the video and have the layers change as you would imagine them changing in the game. And I mean, what I've done in the past, put a bit of text up saying, "Here it changes to layer 2." But then when they go, "Oh, can we have these tracks just to try it?" you can actually just deliver a whole thing, and that's much more providing a service immediately, which is part of what, you know, the business side of developers like. They are looking for a service.
I know you mentioned sort of some of your previous more bombastic tracks. I know Doom Warrior is certainly one of them that has that sort of hard level of orchestra. You know,
oh man, I loved writing that. That was such a long time ago. I just let loose. It was great fun.
Yeah, it's definitely something that completely then threw me off to go from that, because when I was listening to all, so I listened to all the ones on your website. That was my week, just in general. And,
wow!
So, but it was quite jarring going from that to then Hookbots and Color Guardians, because they're two completely different styles. And I think particularly with Hookbots and Color Guardians, you've got much more of a sort of a playful element of synth and all that added into it that you don't have in Doom Warrior, obviously. But when you were kind of sort of, when you got the initial job for Hookbots and Color Guardian, did they approach you about that? And if so, what did they kind of draw on from your previous work? Because obviously, as we find, you know, especially in the games, March of the Living, Doom Warrior, not very synthy and not very fun in comparison.
So Color Guardians came before Hookbots. I think Color Guardians was like the first, I think for me, was the first console game that I did, I think. I'd made friends with the developers. They're developers in Costa Rica. I think they were, at the time, they were the only kind of developers, like official, proper, registered business type developers in Costa Rica, Fair Play Labs. They've just been involved with that Nickelodeon ball game, which is great. And how did I convince them? I did a couple of, they did a couple of game jams, and I wrote some nice things for them, and And then they kind of went, "Oh, we're making this Color Guardians game. Would you be interested?" And I ended up doing all the sound bits, all the sound effects. It was like my first wow, doing basically audio lead, music, sound effects, and everything, which was great because I had a real freedom with it. What did I send them as a pitch? I can't really remember because I don't know what I had in my archives that would have been entirely appropriate. I probably wrote something for them in that style. I mean, I've always loved like Mario Kart and kind of jazz and funk and stuff as well, and so it was kind of just my little twist and interpretation on it, that kind of just fun, upbeat stuff. And it was an absolute blast to write it. And then when Hookbots came along, so Hookbots was kind of this game, was their second game that they were developing, and we knew we wanted to work together, so there was no need to pitch again or anything like that. They had another guy do the sound effects, a local, which was really good for them, because I think that makes a difference, particularly for sound design aspects. To have those, be local and have those conversations really does help at times. And I made a track which I think ended up turning into the main theme track, so incorporating kind of robotic noises and kind of metallic stuff and everything, just to give that flavor of bots, basically, of robots. And I think that was the kind of initial pitch idea. And then after that, they just, we knew we wanted to work together, so it was straightforward and happy days. Yeah.
Mentioning those titles in comparison to, say, a more single-player narrative experience like The Falconeer or Omno, what was the sort of bigger challenges you encountered when composing music for multiplayer as opposed to single-player?
Well, the challenges are keeping it interesting, but not getting in the way too much. Particularly when your budget, or just the budget restriction, or necessarily the game, you don't know how long they're going to be in an area or playing in the game. I mean, if it's a couch multiplayer, like one guy might trash the other guys in 30 seconds, game over, or they might actually be hammering at it for 6, 7, 8 minutes. But you can't, a 6, 7 or 8 minute track is not, it's perfectly, I suppose it's doable, but it's not really feasible. And so it's writing music that can loop or go back to different loop points to keep it interesting and keep the structure a bit varied. So little nuggets of interest that don't become too much. I think I was lucky in that my first job that I had when I worked remotely for the company that my brother was a coder for, is that it was Battle Camp, and they wanted like a different theme like every other week kind of thing, in a different style, because they were pumping out all these different kind of themed events for this game. And so what that helped me develop was to write in different styles kind of quickly, and to write short loops, and only like minute and a half long, that would still be okay to listen to after like an hour and a half in this area. People spent way longer than that in those areas, and they never complained about the music, so it must have been okay. And that was a really good training ground for writing music that was interesting and without getting tiring.
Do you think that, especially when it comes to multiplayer composition, there's a distinct sort of difference between composing for a couch co-op multiplayer game and then something that's maybe a bit more along the lines of, say, an esports title like a Call of Duty or a Counter-Strike? Because, a lot of the time you'll have players wanting to be a bit more concentrated on the audio design, knowing where people are. So you'll actually see a lot of streamers turn off the music in, say, Call of Duty on multiplayer. So how does that, is that something that you're a fan of? Do you think music should be there to enhance the player's experience in a sort of a competitive setting as well? Or is it more so of a relaxed sort of casual environment that it breathes life into?
I think for the kind of the esports stuff, it's serious gaming for them. So if they want to turn the music off, then fine. It's not necessarily the way that we had hoped that they would experience it. But I think often in those kind of, in like COD or whatever, those bits of music that you hear, they're there to make your experience feel a bit personal. And obviously to inform you and give you information, but to make it a bit personal. But I think when there's money on the line in your gaming, people, they need to hear the footsteps more than they need to hear anything else, basically, in COD. So they kind of, turn it off, and that's fair enough. I think there is a big difference, though, in that when you're doing a couch multiplayer game, everyone's come around to have fun.
Mhm.
You know, it's not hasn't got that seriousness, and so the music can be more fun and more interesting. And obviously, it's got to make sure it's balanced, the sound design, and not get in the way of it, because multiplayer, split screen multiplayer is chaotic, and you need good audio feedback from the sound design.
Mhm.
But you can have more fun, and I don't think people tend to turn the music off in couch co-op.
Mhm.
When I did Catastronauts, that was another couch co-op one, and that was really good fun. And like, yeah, I don't think anyone ever got asked to turn the music. You know, can we have an option to turn the music off or anything? But
Mhm.
I think it depends on what is the purpose of the gaming. Is it to have fun, or is it something that's, you know, serious, and therefore the music needs to be appropriate to that.
Mhm.
I recently, this is going to sound like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but I recently did music for a game called Dread Hunger, which is like
Mhm.
it's you know, a survival kind of stab in the back, like Among Us, but basically set on an Antarctic trip, based on trips to Antarctica and exploring. It's really good fun. People should check it out. And that was different. It was, you know, the music can't really do too much because people are talking online to each other, and it's got, you know, distance-based chat and stuff. And so anything that you do, you've got to be really careful. It's not getting in the way of certain frequencies, you know, the frequencies of the voice, and that it gives an indication of what you're trying to get there and how you want them to feel, but it doesn't overcook it. It doesn't go all out like you can do in a single player
Mhm.
kind of cinematic experience. It's got its own challenges for sure.
I'm just imagining how sort of maybe insulting it would be if somebody like messaged you being like, "Is there an option to turn off the music?" Oh, but
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, like, I was quite fortunate in working with, you know, Jonas on Omno. We made a decision to not have that option.
Mhm.
Basically, the music is there because we felt, you know, really nice. I mean, obviously, I felt it, but Jonas agreed with me. The music was too integral to the experience
Mhm.
to just go mute that. And you know, and it's a game developed by Jonas and myself. You know, we couldn't go all out on the sound design. You know, it's not as if you could mute the music and then you have a whole world of sound design that's around you. So there's a few things. You know, the music is covering or masking a little bit
Mhm.
in places. There isn't quite as much detail to sound design that we would like. I mean, we talked about going all out on the sound design, but you know, it was just too much. I mean, Jonas worked on that game for 4.5 years or something, and I was involved for several years. Um, and yeah, it's just
Mhm.
the music was more important for us on that one, so we didn't give anyone the option to turn it off.
Well, it was definitely one of the things that drew me to the game initially because I became quite familiar through your work, obviously through the Falconeer, and myself and my co-host who isn't here today, Connor, we actually had the pleasure of being able to interview Thomas back when that had kind of back around February, March time,
Yeah,
and we were talking about how great the music was, and Thomas was singing your praises to no end, which is fantastic, which is what you'd want to hear, of course.
yeah.
Um, but on that as well, you know, hearing Omno, it's almost like there's a distinction, I think, between some sort of games when you kind of have a game you're playing or a game you're experiencing, and Omno is very much because Omno doesn't have a very difficult. It isn't a difficult game, but it's much more of an experience. Something I'm sure you're probably sick to death of hearing the comparisons between it and Journey, which is of course one of the games that I think defined that sort of genre back when it came out in 2013. But it would be
Yeah.
criminal, I think, to turn off the music, and that it probably might be a good, if you had the option to switch off the music, a good barometer for, yes, well, weeding out psychopaths in a way, wouldn't it? Because who would want to experience that without the music? Um,
Yeah.
before we move on a little bit more to some of your other gaming works, I want to touch on briefly just the time you spent in film composition, because I know
Mhm.
you did an interview back in 2015 with the Audio Spotlight, an online publication, and
Oh yeah.
you were mentioning in that one of the refreshing things about writing for film is there's less concern about interactivity. You want to engage the viewer, but it's not the same with a game. So with that in mind, when you get sent a pitch now, do you kind of embrace the level of complexity with the interactivity for sound design, or are you more like when you get a film pitch, you're like, oh my god, this is my bread and butter. I just get to really inject myself into this sort of hour and a half of music.
Um, so when game pitches come in, absolutely embrace the complexity. I love it. I love solving those kinds of issues. Um, I've always, I mean, music and maths were always my things, you know. So there's a part of my brain loves problem solving in that sense, and working out how I can make things happen. But when a linear job comes along, it's really nice as well, you know, in a different way. It's, you know, it's, yeah, to just be not having to worry about how things are going to crossfade or into each other, and just be worrying about, you know, the notes and the emotions and the intent of the director in any particular moment is, it's kind of refreshing in a way. And you know, you pour yourself into it. I pour myself into it in a slightly different way, I think. But it's no less intensive in the terms of the work, or kind of the creative outpouring, as it were. You know, it's still, it's not like if I'm scoring a film, I'll just work 9 to 5 and stop. It's on my mind the whole time. And same with games. That doesn't change, because you're creating something that is in some ways an expression of yourself in alliance and in cooperation with other people's kind of expressions of ideas. And so the sense of workload is the same. I think most people understand the differences between linear music and interactive music. I don't think I really need to kind of, there's much more eloquent people have talked about that than myself. So yeah.
Do you view, I know you said that there's varying difficulties to both, but would you view, if you got a linear piece sent to you, would you see that as an easier experience than the interactive?
In some ways, yes, I think. If someone just said, I just want this one piece of music and that's it, then it's like, okay, great. You know, if it's too, you know, if it's just a track on its own, then great. You know, it's like, if it's to film, then I've still got to hit points. I've still got to, you know, consider all of those things, and you have to plan, you know, as you write. I don't think any composer for media is, whether that's, you know, films, games, or whatever, is ever just thinking about the one bar that they are currently in, or the, you know, the one phrase. They're thinking ahead. They're thinking, is this motif going to work at this stage over here? You know, have I worked out my tempos so that I can hit that point at the right moment, whether it be on an offbeat or an onbeat? You know, am I going to hit that nicely? You know, and they're thinking about that, you know, 30 seconds earlier, you know, in the production. So it's in some ways, yeah, linear stuff is really nice, but at the same time, you're still thinking ahead. You know, it's you're considering so many aspects, I think.
Yeah, a general question that kind of just popped in my head, because as someone who's studying media and broadcast production now, you know, every time that we're out, we're told to go and record something, or we're creating a project. The main thing we're always told is, especially with music, is to film first and then add music later, and have music add on to that. It's not get your piece of music and then work around that. Is that really frustrating for someone like you? Because say if I go out and I get a film, and someone who has at least a basic understanding of music, you know, 4/4 time, all these different bits, and the way in which notes will line up with, say, certain elements of what's on screen. If I say, you know, you have a bar, let's say every 4 seconds or something, and I have a piece, if I have a bit of video that's 5 seconds, will that frustrate you in post-production if it comes your way like that?
Yes and no. I mean, it depends. It depends on the style of music I'm writing. It depends on. Sometimes directors are quite flexible and go, okay, well, we'll change it to, you know, if they really value what the music can bring to the production, then they're happy to have a conversation. But sometimes they're set in stone what they want visually, and you've got to work to that, and you work these puzzles out, and you kind of just go, okay, well, how can I do this the best way that it can work? And sometimes you nail it, and sometimes you hear it 6 months later and think, oh my god, that was a terrible idea, why did I do that? It was, and you know, and that's part of it. I think I always prefer it if there was an open conversation about music while editing is still going on. But I fully understand the business side of things, the demands of time and stuff. It is often easier for people to go, like, I've done all the editing, now I've just got to find some music that fits this. It's, you know, I mean, some directors, you know, they get their, like Hans Zimmer does, write suites of music before they've even shot and edited the film, and then because then it all comes together in the director's head, and you know, everything can be more malleable and create amazing experiences that way, which is and as a result you do get a different style of scoring to film than, you know, for what we had decades ago, where things were very much kind of more to hit points, and you know, but it's an evolution of the art and kind of divergences in different styles. So you just work with what you get, basically. You'd be grateful that you've got the job, and you work hard to do it. So.
That's it. Moving on to one of your games, which I actually found since listening to you, I suppose the soundtracks that I can find that were available of your games, one of my favorites is Before We Leave. I really enjoyed listening to that. I think it's a fantastically sort of good mix of ambience and sort of otherworldliness to it as well, which, as you would expect from a title like that. At the time, I think it was probably your longest produced soundtrack, was about 90 minutes in length. You know, you talk about sort of the complexities of interactivity in games. Is it quite daunting to create something that's that requires so much commitment, or do you kind of think, oh, I can't wait to get stuck into this, and you're kind of trying a few different bits and pieces, or does it again sort of get kind of exhausting at times?
I think for any composer, when you first start on a big project, it's a tiny bit daunting, because you're just like, right, you know, this is the start of the project, and all you've got in front of you is an empty canvas that stretches miles and miles and miles. But then, like, when you get into it, when you start finding those nuggets, those ideas, establishing your moods and your themes and your templates and stuff, and then you can just be creative. I love it. It's awesome. I love it. I mean, Before We Leave was an absolute blast to score. I was, you know, having the time. Like, I did a lot of the percussion and stuff on it is myself doing it live, and I was bouncing off the walls to some of those tunes. And it's as you said, it's a really nice mix of kind of ambient, gentle stuff, non-diegetic music, which highlights key moments in the game and keeps the player going. But then there's also loads of diegetic tunes. So the little houses in the game, they'll play music basically out of the houses to tell you whether or not they're happy or sad, which is just an idea that I had. I said, hey, can we try this? Can we implement this? Which totally expanded the scope of the project from the original kind of contract. But it was totally worth it. And, you know, I had a great time writing those. Really did. It was, you know, just coming up with these fun little tunes and imagining these little people in their little house, kind of with their basic folk instrument type things, and just, you know, and then as the game evolves and you get more technological, I introduce a few more technical kind of instruments, and also throwing, you know, I mean, I had a blast. Like, there's one of the pieces in there, can't remember the name of it now, but basically, is it the hidden pentagon? I can't remember exactly, but because in Before We Leave, because the world is made up of hexagons, quite a few of the fans, as the game has been developed, kept on saying, "How have you done a sphere made out of hexagons? You must have some pentagons somewhere. It's impossible. You must have some pentagons somewhere to make it all tessellate." And they are in there, but they're hidden by very clever code most of the time. Some people have spotted them, but they are generally hidden. So I was like, well, I'm going to write a piece of music that is mainly in 6/8, but every now and then there's a 5/8 bar in there, you know, to reflect pentagons, and see if I can kind of throw the rhythms about and stuff, and just have a bit of fun, you know. And that was like, you know, probably 3 days or something, just having a blast, and it was really enjoyable to do. And the developers were you know, really great in kind of accepting my ideas and things, and that's why the game flourished. That's why it's done really, really well, which is delightful for everybody. And, you know, it's when people are, you know, enjoying their creativity, I think it's when the best stuff comes out, really. So.
That's such a fantastic. I couldn't even believe that's such a brilliant way of doing the whole pentagon thing, and with the change in time signature, fantastic. Speaking of longer soundtracks, we've touched on it a little bit already. Omno, it's about an hour and 45 minutes long. Was it as therapeutic to write as it was to listen to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Omno was a dream come true for me, to be perfectly honest. It goes, I mean, the only way I can describe it is gentle euphoria, you know, as things came together and I was writing it. And I think it stems all the way back to when I was, I don't know, 17, 18, 19, kind of first getting into music production. You know, I was classically trained and everything, and then got into making my own music. It was a very natural evolution for me. I was writing gentle music because I was, so used to playing kind of, like Brahms and Beethoven and things like that. And obviously that's not all gentle, but so something about it, I just started writing these kind of mini albums of gentle music. And so when I first saw some of the kind of artwork from Jonas, I think he just posted it on it was a Facebook group, and I was just like, I want to score that. That it resonated with me in a way more so than I could do with that job kind of size. Because you see things and you go, that would be fun to do. That's the third person action. Yeah, that would be really fun. But for me, it was on a deeper level because it was like it resonated with part of my creative soul, I guess, to be poetic and fancy about it. And so, yeah, I mean, I got in contact and I pitched to him, as did I think hundreds of other composers, because it was just gorgeous artwork and the style and everything about it. And eventually we decided, Jonas wanted to work with me. He loved, in fact, I kept on sending him pitch tracks, basically. I don't know if it really annoyed him or not in the end, but I've got a folder of tracks there. Every time he was posting stuff, I was like, I can imagine what would go to that. And so I was sending him stuff. And I think in the end, it was 8 bars of one of the tracks that really resonated with him, which was wonderful because it was like probably one of my favorite 8 bars as well. And then from there, we worked together, and just having the opportunity to come in and just into the studio and just write gentle, nice music that I knew I hoped people would enjoy listening to apart from the game, but would also complement the game and solidify the experience. It was dream come true, to be perfectly honest. And working with Jonas, Jonas is the nicest guy. I mean, I'm really lucky. I've worked, basically every developer I've worked with been really lovely people. Maybe it's just something in the industry. It's just great people. But Jonas is got a heart of gold, and to work with him, he wanted changes. There were times when I would write a track and he would be, actually that's too much, or this, that, or the other. It's like, okay, fine. That's we're still serving the game, but at least I've had that chance to, for a week and a half, to write this track that I wanted to write, and we can work on it to make it, fit the game. I think in the Fourth World Area 2, I think I wrote a track and basically it was a little bit too upbeat. So basically I just slowed it down a bit and just sort of, kind of made it a little bit more elegant and fluid in its melodic shapes and things, and he was happy with it. And those 5-6 minute tracks, and it's not because he asked for the tracks to be that long, it was just because that was just the natural way the piece came about. And after days of work, I was like, okay, that's the piece. Now I've just got to make sure that it loops nicely and that it works going into what it's got to go into next and where it's coming from. And there we are. And I obsessed over it. I obsessed over that soundtrack. To the point where I think Jonas was like, hey, come on, we need final tracks to go in the game now. Like one of the tracks is, I've got 52 saved projects, of it, working on it day after day, listening to it, going, is that violin line, is that as good as I can make that violin line? I haven't got a real violinist, so I've got the opportunity to manipulate this a little bit more. It's just the best that I can do. It's just as close to perfection as I want it to be. So yeah.
Yeah, no,
short answer. It was awesome.
Yeah, I think particularly with sort of stuff like Xbox Game Pass, a lot of people really got to experience Omno and they loved it. And I remember at the time, even because my friend Connor and I, we were doing a podcast at the time, kind of reviewing a game on Game Pass each week and kind of taking it out. And Omno had just come to Game Pass, so it was actually, funnily enough, I took the Ascent that week and he did Omno, and then we came back and it was 2 completely different experiences. But I've never, like, the way he spoke about it made me want to then go and play it, because Connor is someone who would be very he's a, I don't know if he'll appreciate me saying this, but quite stressful guy, because he's always working and trying to get stuff done and everything. And I'd never seen him come out and, not in a stoner fashion, but in such a laid back way into a podcast.
LSD and music, yeah.
But he absolutely, he couldn't stop singing its praises. He loved it, and I think he did it in bite-sized like chunks, an hour a night, or at least did each world a night, and he was I don't know. He still talks about it now, and he's like, when I told him about the interview, he's like, "Oh my god, like, oh, it's amazing, like, such an amazing soundtrack." So, I think you have Wood probably a fan for life over there now, because
That's
I think at the time, I don't know if you remember, but he also wrote the piece for our website, Gaming Sandbox, about pesky marauders for the Falconeer. Like,
yeah.
he absolutely loves that, and so do I as well. The use of so is it what is it, the throat singing, but what is the actual origination of it?
It's Mongolian.
Mongolian,
So
yeah.
kind of, yeah, and then I twisted it up a bit just to
Mm-hmm.
do something different. Yeah.
With
Oh,
sort of
that's
yeah. No, sorry, go on.
no. I was just gonna say that's really kind of your colleague to be so complimentary, and that's really nice to hear. I mean, it's touching, particularly when you work on something for years to know that it hasn't been in vain. Because I know, Jonas and I both went through periods of, is this going to resonate with anyone? Is people just going to be like, and it's like, oh, it's coming out the same day as The Ascent. Oh, great. It's like, it's like a complete different thing. And The Ascent, obviously, is a great game. I haven't completed it, but I've enjoyed it very much. And it's like, yeah, two different worlds, which is, I suppose, a good thing.
It's
Whatever people enjoy the most.
It's quite funny because if you go up to The Ascent, it kind of like gives you a kick in the balls and throws you out in the door, and then like you go to Omno and it gives you a nice warm hug. It's like it's a complete different experience. So maybe for Game Pass users that day, they got sort of both ends of the spectrum in a sense.
Yeah, it's quite nice.
Did you notice with sort of say the likes of Omno and the Falconeer both coming to Game Pass that you had sort of an increased level of people reaching out to you about the music and how much they enjoyed it, or was it kind of similar to your previous projects?
I know that I would say that the kind of the fans, the people, those who were on Discord over, during development stuff, were they were reaching out and really complimentary, and that was really supportive. Was it much different? I honestly can't remember. We're grateful for any kind of fan who support who comes on and encourage us in our endeavors. Obviously when the Falconeer and Omno kind of got announced for Xbox, there was a lot of hubbub, a lot of excitement, because these games had been on the indie radar for a lot of people for a long time, and then all of a sudden they're going to get a chance to play them for free. It was really nice, and it's really encouraging. But there was certainly an increase in pressure, I think. In one sense, I think for both Thomas, who developed the Falconeer, and Jonas, who obviously did Omno, I mean, they really wanted to make something that was an expression of themselves. Which is why they were going indie and doing their own thing. They were making their own game, to which it was a privilege to accompany them. And so, although their contract was, I think that they were still like, well, I'm still making the game that I want to make. So in that sense, it wasn't like I don't know if they felt a lot more pressure. I think you'd honestly have to ask them. But we were totally aware of the support of the community during, at those times. And I mean, like, some people have already done kind of, what do you call it when you dress up as characters of games? What's that called?
Cosplays.
Cosplay, that's it. Some people have already done Omno cosplay and stuff, which is really touching. And it's kind of like, oh wow, games have they have an influence on people, don't they? It's amazing, really. It's quite an artful.
You obviously, I think a really important note to kind of touch back on is how sort of personal both Omno and the Falconeer were for Jonas and Thomas. How did that sort of translate over to you then? Taking on such a personal project for them and trying to recreate their vision through music, as opposed to say, like obviously stuff like the previous multiplayer stuff we talked about, they're all kind of more the sort of the aim with them is to create an enjoyable couch co-op experience. But for this, it's very much telling a story, a very personal story for someone else. So how did you kind of maneuver yourself around doing justice to that?
Well, I mean, obviously it is a pressure. You're taking something that's beloved to somebody and fleshing it out in one sense. But how I dealt with it is constant communication with them, getting to understand them, their motives, where they come from, and the friendship. Basically, I'm friends with them, and it's getting down to the nub of what matters for them in the game development. But I must also say, I mean, like, for the Falconeer, Thomas was like, Falconeer for him was like a breakout game. I think he'd been working in game producing games for some time as part of a company, but he wanted to make a game on his own, break out and just do his own thing. And he kind of gave me free reign. You know, he was just like, you know, he just signed a contract. It's just like, he was just like, be bold and be different, which is what he was wanting to do to some sense in his kind of development, I think. And so I was just given free reign. He was, you know, he accepted my ideas. He, you know, offered feedback, obviously, but generally he was just like, you know, if you want to do that, let's try doing that. And, you know, and that's why the Falconeer has such an eclectic mix of instruments and stuff. Because I was like, you know what, I'm just going to try. What's if I do this and that? You know, I'm doing sound for a whole different world, which we can talk about more later if you like. And with Jonas, it was kind of similar. Once I knew the vibe that he wanted, what he was trying to express, then he also gave me a lot of creative freedom to write things and to come up with ideas and stuff. And obviously, you know, he was very particular about the cutscenes and making sure that things felt right and that we got the right energy levels for different places. So, you know, all that kind of stuff. So he was obviously still extremely involved on a day-to-day basis in feedback and stuff, but it wasn't like he ever said, I want a track that sounds like this pre-existing track, I'll go and do it kind of thing. It was never like that. And having that freedom meant that taking on the responsibility of expressing their world that little bit easier. Because I think if you've got to create the audio for someone's world, but you're constantly being stamped on saying, no, not like this, not like that. It gets hard. It can break you because you just, at the end of every day, you're like, I failed. I haven't done that right. You know, it's so to work with people that give you the creative freedom and respect your creative freedom enough and trust you, then it makes it that much easier. I can't remember what the original question was, to be perfectly honest, but there you go.
Yeah, it's I mean, obviously I'm not the only person to appreciate the music from. I think 2 days ago it's now been released as this deluxe double vinyl edition of the Falconeer.
Yeah, exciting.
Do you have it, by the way? Do you have a copy of
the double
vinyl?
No, I haven't got a copy of it. No. It's only pre-orders at the moment, so.
And they wouldn't make an exception for the extra composer.
I might receive a copy. I haven't actually, to be perfectly honest, I haven't spoken to them about that. But I know that it's a very limited run, only 1,000 copies, 500 in blue and 500 in green, I think. Which I didn't pick those colors, but you know, it looks cool. So maybe I'll get a copy. I don't have a vinyl player, so it would be. I might frame it and stick it up on a wall somewhere, maybe out of shot. Yeah, I don't have a copy of it yet. So. Anyway, I've got all the files on in my studio, so I could if I wanted to sit down and listen to it anyway.
But there is something
missing out.
There's something about creating something and having a physical copy of it, isn't there?
Absolutely. I've still got copies of like the original Settlers and things on floppy disk and stuff, and the boxes and CDs of music that came. You know, with games from years and years ago. It's something. I mean, I used to love reading CD sleeves. You know, any bit of information that I could glean out of them about how it was orchestrated, or you know, anything like that, I would soak it up. It was having physical copies is nice, but we live in a digital age, don't we? So
yeah, it's always really strange because I really love when indie games release a physical copy of a game, because I have the physical copy of the Falconeer, and like Hades is up there as well or whatever. But it's like nice. It's sort of it is a dying art in a sense, sort of the art of the box art, and also the manuals, the very thick manuals you used to get with them as well. Like I remember specifically, this might show my age, but when I was very young, I wouldn't say very young, like about 10, 11, getting Halo 3, it would come with pages of art that you just wouldn't get anywhere else. It's such a. Do you think that that's specifically? I suppose more so it'd be interesting for your, obviously with the Falconeer, it's kind of going out on vinyl and all that. Do you think there's a missed opportunity now, or at least it's a dying art, that stuff doesn't get released on, say, CD or vinyl as much?
Yeah, I think it's a shame. I think there's something tangible to it, and it's nice, and I think there's a greater sense of ownership for people if they have it, and that sense of ownership helps connect with community and helps the person connect with the game and the things that they remember. Like, I'm sure you could probably remember Halo 3 inside out, you know, because you had it there. You know, it's something special, but at the same time, they do just collect dust. So, you know, and it's like at some point in your life, even when you move house or whatever, you go, do I really need this material thing here? You know, I mean, I'm sat in a room full of equipment and stuff that I probably could chuck off about, you know, but it's like I think somewhere down here I've still got some kind of educational books that, you know, I loved as a kid, and you hold on to them. And but you know, the reality is, do I need it? But I do think having physical copies of things is really nice. I mean, I know you can buy like digital art books and stuff off Steam, and people love that. And I think it's really good for community, for those who are learning, you know, learning how games are put together, maybe how to do animation, or how to, you know, construct level designs that it's informative to the player and all that kind of stuff. There's great educational value in them, as well as just dusty collector edition stuff.
Yeah. Speaking, I suppose we get back to the main crux of talking about the Falconeer a little bit. I kind of want to ask, one of the things I noticed when playing the Falconeer is that, you know, it has a very good balance of very ambient style music, as you know, you're kind of soaring through the clouds and through different areas, and then it very kind of brilliantly, in a sense, adjusts to combat settings, and it can feel very overwhelming, and, you know, kind of you're out there in the middle of nowhere, not knowing where your enemies are. How was that was that a key sort of, I suppose, was that intentional on your part? I'm assuming yes, I'm going to say, but if with that intention, you know, what sort of direction was there from Thomas on that, or was that kind of all just your imagination going wild with the possibilities?
Well, the direction from, like I said before, from Thomas was to be bold and different, but his direction often came through the beauty of the game and his style of art, you know. Immediately I was hit when I was just soaring around, just how beautiful the place is, you know, the wash of colors and the style of the art and the graphics and everything. And so I was like, well, I need to reflect that. I want people to feel that calmness and that peace. And then it chucks you into battle like that, and so the music just has to turn on a dime and just be like visceral and smacking. And you know, it's close quarters combat, and I just like, you know what, I just went for it. I came up with this stuff. In fact, I think the very first thing I did for him, I can't even remember if it was a pitch or whether or not we'd already agreed to work together, was one battle track. And he had said something to me along the lines of he wanted a combination of, he wanted Mongolian singing it. He right from the very start, he was like Mongolian singing. So I was like, okay. But then I was like, well, I'm going to put in those ripped, roaring synths, that kind of, and all that kind of, all that stuff. And I heard it in my head, and I thought, I just want to give it a go and be really, really strong in what I was saying, kind of, because he was saying be bold. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be bold. And I, you know, that's what I did. And just, we stuck it in game. And then, you know, I did the more ambient stuff, which is kind of a generic kind of out at sea kind of drone that carries on with little, depending on if you fly near things, there are little bits of music cues and stuff that will trigger and stuff. And it just fell together, you know, it just worked. And then the next thing that I kind of, to improve that experience, was I worked on some of the sound design. He'd had a placeholder wind loop and basic kind of C loop in it, and it was quite, to my mind, it was quite narrow and not just in terms of stereo placement, but kind of just in its it doesn't make any sense, but to say sense of depth, I suppose. And so I did a pass, put it to some video footage of kind of much more kind of wider. I tried to make it feel a little bit more cinematic, I guess, a little bit more epic. And then that refreshed sound design in combination with the ambience and the kind of the hard hitting, visceral, close combat kind of smacking your face, you're in trouble, duck and dive kind of thing. And it just worked. It was, yeah, it was good. I mean, Thomas gave me a few indications about what he wanted, but then let me go free with it, basically. which is the nicest thing.
Certainly, yeah. Do you play the games that you score to, or is that kind of something
Oh,
you...
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, I clocked over 300 hours playing the Falconeer in the first year, I think, of development. I don't know. I can't remember. Like, it was a lot, and that was before we even changed the development branch that it was on, and so, you know, even more so than that. But yeah, absolutely. I played them to death, I think. Not as much so as like Thomas obviously did. I think he clocked over 1,000 hours or something, or even
well,
more.
as he should. But, he to develop it.
Yeah. But yeah, I play them a lot. I mean, I really enjoy them. I enjoy the games that I work on. And how can you? For me, I can't imagine trying to create an experience without experiencing the experience. If that makes sense, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I play them a lot, as much as I can within the restraints of how much work I've got to do. So yeah.
Do you out of sort of your long sort of discography, do you have a particular favorite soundtrack, or at least one that you're most proud of?
Oh, I don't know. I'm proud of all of them for different reasons. Whether it's because the joy, the enjoyment of writing them, whatever the style is, or whether it's the technical achievements, or whether it's I felt like I improved in my mixing in some way. I would for sure Omno the Falconeer and Before We Leave. I would, you know, kind of. I mean, they're the highlights of my career for the last couple of years. So I definitely the most enjoyable. Within those soundtracks, I think there's probably a couple of different tracks that I'm like, yeah, I nailed that. I'm really pleased with that. Inside Omno, so I don't want to do spoilers, but I think anyone who's going to play the game has probably played it by now. So kind of as you're climbing up towards the final, you know, the final ascent, kind of where it combines various puzzle elements. That's not too much of a spoiler. Most games do that in like this style. So that track, like, I wrote it right near the end. It was kind of, yeah, it was pretty close to the end, but it combines loads of the melodics of the kind of motifs and things from other tracks throughout the game. And I had a vague idea that I wanted to do that when I was writing those motifs and those melodies before, but I didn't let it control creation of them. So when it came to this final track and it all just worked, I was like, damn, that's amazing. I was so pleased. I had a little kind of like pat myself on the back moment because everything came together. And to me, that was like it kind of spoke to me and said, this really was a creative endeavor for me and an outpouring of a part of me, because everything slotted together really nicely as far as I was concerned with that. So that for me is definitely one of the track highlights in a soundtrack that I'm very proud of in general, really. I mean, the Omno track I'm very proud of because it's just music I love to write. It was blissful. It was nice to get up every morning and write it. But the Falconeer was awesome. The Falconeer was awesome because I got to create music for the whole world. Do the sound for the whole world and create music for the different cultures within that world, and just experiment, and have fun and stick voices and bagpipes and organs and synthesizers and sazes and all sorts of Balkan singers and Mongolian singers, all sorts of things together, and just experiment. And for me, there's a real creative freedom in that Thomas afforded me, and that was super enjoyable as well. But Before We Leave, again, it's super enjoyable because like writing all these bouncy tunes for the diegetic stuff was, I was happy days. It was just really fun. So I'm sorry, this is not a very good answer to what is basically a simple question, but I really, I've liked all of them as different as they all are from each other. I've loved writing all of them for different reasons, I think.
I'm going to get really sort of inquisitive here for a second, but can you tell us anything about what you're working on now? You did say go for it.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of projects in development. I can't say much about two of them. In fact, I can't really say anything about two of them, to be perfectly honest. But they're cool projects. There's a couple of things that I'm scheduled to work on from certain developers who I've got a good working relationship with in the future. The only thing that I can even really mention is there's an indie game called Slope Crashers, which is kind of snowboarding for all those people who had an N64, if they ever played Snowboard Kids. It's basically a spiritual successor to that. And I played Snowboard Kids a lot as with my 4 brothers. So I mean, when I first saw developer posting about it, it was years ago. I was like, oh, please let me, I love this game. I love the its heritage, and I think I could have some fun with this. So I wrote a bunch of tracks for him, which I think people can actually, I don't know if the demo is still on Steam or not, but that's a couple of years ago, and I've got to write some more music for him, and that's really upbeat fun stuff. It's kind of that other side to, it seems like a multi-sided coin, more than 2 sides of my styles. So yeah, that's something that I can say that I've got actively going on. Yeah.
Well, it's more than I expected, so that's the main thing. I think it's safe to say, though, we'll be hearing more of your work in the future, which is fantastic.
Oh, I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. It keeps coming in.
Final quick question. It's more of just a trivia kind of question, but if there was sort of one IP you could score, what would it be and why?
That's, well, I love strategy games. I've always loved strategy games. I started out like Settlers, I think was the first game that I played. So I guess if I was ever given the opportunity to score a Settlers game, I would hit the ceiling, and I'd be like, yes, I would love to do that. But I mean, I would say Command and Conquer, but like they've got great, tracking for command. I mean, I'm never going to get offered it because like the music for that is so good, and it's defined already. Yeah, I think it would just have to be some kind of strategy game. I think. I mean, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. Well,
yeah.
Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.